transition. So with that in mind, let us jump straight in with part one, this week in Bitcoin. So what did we get? Let me just go through the events of this week to kind of let you know that how we're making history here and how this led to where we are today. So it was announced at the beginning of this week that it wasn't going to be a Bitcoin strategic reserve. It was going to be a crypto strategic reserve. And it was going to consist of, in the initial announcement, Solana, XRP, Cardano ADA, and then immediately another post followed saying, of course, we're going to be doing Bitcoin and ETH as well. And what you can see here is that very clearly, these ideas are being tested on social media, seeing how they stick. The feedback is coming through, and we are actually dictating policy to some degree as we give our feedback through the fact that there is real-time media feedback right now. And of course, upon all of these announcements, you got incredible pump and dumps. And of course, as always, political insiders and those connected to the Proof-of-Weapons network that are kissing the ring of Donald Trump right now would have got some insider information and would have been able to preempt those moves to get on the right side of the pump and dump. But if you've been watching Bitcoin Hard Talk, you don't fall for any of that stuff, because your job is just to own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month and beat the Federal Reserve, rather than falling for the fake blockchain fiat currency money printing of these shitcoins that are pre-mined in order to fool you away from your Bitcoin, because you end up trading and gambling and leveraging and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. But of course, you won't fall for that. But those that did fall for that, the insiders win and 99% of the other people lose. But anyway, every announcement led to its own pump and dump and its own insider trading and its own in types of things that are happening. But immediately after that, when we were getting all of these corrections, all of these pumps, all of these 50% rise in XRP, and then the dump that comes from it after all of these announcements, we had another announcement which said that the White House is going to be hosting the first ever crypto summit on March the 7th. That is today, and it will start after Bitcoin Hard Talk. Will end just before it starts to begin. Now, obviously, throughout social media, there were complaints saying, what about my shitcoin? Saying, well, I thought we were doing Bitcoin. I don't want taxpayers' money making Brad Garlinghouse rich because he, financed some of the Trump administration with some coins that he printed. And so, therefore, why should taxpayers' money go on that? And there was lots of pivots around this. And so what did we have? The next announcement was that basically the feedback was coming through social media that basically David Sachs, who's the crypto czar, and Trump, who's really outsourcing the policy to the crypto czar because, he's meant to be negotiating world peace right now. Bigger things to fry. It was really the pushback initially when they said crypto strategic reserve rather than Bitcoin strategic reserve. There was all sorts of videos that came out saying that this is defrauding billions of dollars from taxpayers into the pockets of the founders of those coins and the companies connected to those coins and the bodies that were part of the crypto lobby and those that were benefiting from these pre-mined coins. And so that became a really unpopular message. You can't say the same for Bitcoin. There's no founder. Satoshi Nakamoto was anonymous, left the project a long time ago. I have my speculations over who I think it is, and I believe they are no longer with us. And so there's no founder, there's no pre-mine, there's no unfair launch. And so it gets that type of feedback. You get that type of pushback when you put this in front of millions of people. Essentially, it's asset stripping of the dollar. So the dollar is debt-based, proof of weapons, needs war in order to thrive, in order to increase the money supply. And as the supply increases, it wipes out middle-class America and confiscates assets that go from those that are not connected to the proof-of-weapons network and are borrowing at 30% on credit card and 40% payday loans, and transfers that wealth over to those that can borrow at 0% in order to purchase assets utilizing the debt of the proof-of-weapons network. And that's what we have seen ever since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, a confiscation of wealth and the asset stripping of all the assets of America, to the point where the courtocracy, the technocracy, whatever you want to call it, is way more powerful than the government, just like you're seeing with Elon right now, having more power. And the lobby then is what determines politics, as opposed to what is right for the everyday American people. And so this is essentially a form of asset stripping. If somebody can print a token, and then they can get the US government to print some dollars, and then that dollars is used in order to acquire that token from a company, and then they end up getting rich, and that and then everyone else that wasn't involved in that, they end up paying the inflation. And so, quite right, it is not right to do this with shit coins. That I'm a shareholder in Ripple Labs, and the more that happens, the more the Ripple Labs shareholders make a load of money. And so, that's not how you make a difference. This is crony capitalism to the highest degree. This is why Bitcoin proof of work is different. This is why it's backed by the largest distributed supercomputer. This is why it's apolitical. This is why everybody ends up capitulating to Bitcoin. And this is why you can mess around with short-term price manipulation. But the much easier thing to do is own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, and keep doing that through the 4-year cycles, and beat the money printing of the Federal Reserve and the network of economic hitmen that perpetuate dollar debt around the world through the Bank for International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, and other organizations like the World Bank, designed to enslave the world at the expense of the rich people in America. That's the way the system was designed. And all the debt obviously benefits the banks, and the banks are the shareholders of the Federal Reserve. And at this point, it is blatantly obvious that the Federal Reserve was also created by the same people that created the Bank of England. And that is what led to the slow transition of constitutional capitalist America over to socialist, to the point where you have to fire half the government, and you have to go through austerity, and you have to crash the stock markets in order to return to some normality, because it's driving us to World War III, when everyone is having all of their money that's being printed sucked up into the dollar proof-of-weapons network. And then the US government, through crony capitalism, is using it to fund wars and overthrow governments around the world. And then you end up basically paying for the destruction of yourself. And so obviously, when you wipe out middle-class America, eventually you end up extreme left, extreme right populism. And then that leads to civil war, unrest, revolutions. And when that happens, you tend to get external forces that are pissed off with the system, figured out a way of exiting central banking by utilizing real resources like gold, oil, or Bitcoin, or any other real asset that beats the proof-of-weapons network. And then they use that to build power, and then they end up wanting to change the world order, which is what we experienced, that hit a tipping point under the Biden administration, and is now in strategic retreat because Russia won that war. Now we're reforming the proof-of-weapons network, which is a proxy war between US and Russia. And Russia was aligned with BRICS, and now a rising power has said, let's not go to World War III. And so Trump is doing a strategic retreat in the name of MAGA and America First. And that's what we're witnessing right now. So the pre-mined coins are kind of like fiat currency, right? And so people were saying, this isn't what we signed up for. You got a load of people in the community, even those that own exchanges and engage with all other coins and stuff. They were saying Bitcoin's completely different. You can't call it a strategic reserve. It makes a mockery, because why? A strategic reserve is actually a very, very important term. It means that you use it as reserves in organize either through a central bank or through treasury to protect yourself from the central bank. But also the proof-of-weapons network has weaponized that term in order to perpetuate demand for dollar, which is heavily concentrated in the hands of central banks and wealthy oligarchs, and push out dollar debt. And so by using that term, it means that everyone is skewed towards dollars and gold. Now, if you get to print the dollar, that gives you an exorbitant privilege, which is why America is America. But eventually it reaches to a level of wealth inequality where the whole thing blows up because now the average person can't afford anything. And so when you classify Bitcoin as a strategic reserve, that term has been weaponized by the economic hitmen at the International Monetary Fund. And now the International Monetary Fund are in a bit of a dilemma, because if the administration then classifies Bitcoin as a strategic reserve in the American economy to defend itself from the financial weapons of mass destruction and the occupation of the Federal Reserve, then the IMF, when it's going to countries like El Salvador and saying you can't use Bitcoin as strategic reserves, all right, well, America has suddenly defined it, and now the global South gets to defend itself from the very institution, the International Monetary Fund, that in the post-World War II global order created the death and destruction, wars, and the complete annihilation of the balance sheet of the American Treasury to the point where it's $36 trillion in debt with $250 trillion of committed liabilities. And that is what we are witnessing right in front of us right now. And so by making Bitcoin a strategic reserve asset, we create this bottom-up movement. And you know what? The market was so dumb. This was your classic, the market not understanding. Because of all the news, people were expecting an announcement that they're going to buy 1 million Bitcoin or something. And because that didn't happen, the market started to correct. And it's now below $90,000 because people were waiting for the US government to buy it. I'll go through in detail why they have missed the point. And they have missed the point in a big way, which creates a beautiful opportunity for you to accumulate some Bitcoin under 90,000 if it is your time to accumulate at the moment. Make as much fiat currency, boycott the Federal Reserve, save in Bitcoin. I know more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. Get yourself the ability to de-enslave yourself, decolonize yourself from dollar debt, and keep doing it, wash, rinse, repeat until you are free. That is a mission that we should all be on. But now America, if this goes through, has the opportunity to free itself from the Federal Reserve, which is 100% necessary right now. And that is what strategic reserves should be about. It's not doing what Czech Republic's doing, where Czech Republic is allowing the central bank to accumulate the Bitcoin and exploring that. It is when you allow the treasury to accumulate the Bitcoin. And therefore, it gives the option that those countries occupied by the proof-of-weapons network don't have with their debt-based Ponzi schemes that's driving the government to become huge, bloated, corrupt, and massive through the financial weapons of mass destruction of the Federal Reserve. So what you should be doing is what we ended up with, using Bitcoin as a strategic reserve, because it is the only digital commodity that is hard money with a fixed supply that cannot be manipulated by any government, no matter how much resources they have long term, and is geopolitically neutral in terms of the geographical locations that are mining it and all the mining pools and the node operators and the way that Satoshi designed it. Now, if you want to be strategic, there could be an argument, and I could make an argument for you. You know, I have a little bit of my reserves in protecting from unforeseen scenarios. Like I invested in the Ethereum ICO and I stake that ETH still to this day. I convert the stakes to Bitcoin periodically, but I'm making sure that I'm hedging from certain scenarios. I also know that there is a 1-2 punch that came from Bitcoin, because launched on top of Bitcoin in 2014 was a stable coin called Tether. And that is a very large stablecoin right now. And the other part of this equation is defunding or taking down the fractional reserve banking system. Remember, the Fed gives the ability to create the dollar and the currency to the private banks, and they get to create it every time they issue a loan. And if you have a positive balance in your online banking, someone else has a negative balance. And full reserve banking is how we started. When I first, when we first started, myself and my wife started Bank to the Future, we were fed up of teaching politicians that fractional reserve banking is a Ponzi scheme. And instead, we decided we wanted to create a bank. And so the original vision of Bank to the Future was we were applying at the Bank of England saying we want to create full reserve banking where people own their money, people can spend their money, and we don't want to lever up the balance sheet. And they said, no, you can't do that. You need to put all your deposits with an existing bank that is actually connected to the Bank of England, and we won't give you a license if you don't want to lever up. And so we pivoted to working on Bitcoin and funding many of the companies with our pool, network of investors that are now at the White House setting the future policy as well with the White House. And that's going to be shaped around the world. Now, in 2014, one of the companies that we invested in, Bitfinex, purchased a stablecoin and Tether, and created a digital dollar that was fully reserved and backed. Now, at some points it wasn't, and other points it is. Now it's had attestations and now is moving to audit. And other stablecoins were launched. We invested in companies like Circle that launched USDC as well. Now, what are they backed on? They exist on other networks. What are those networks? Proof of stake. What is proof of stake? Proof of stake means whoever owns the stake controls the network. So those money printers and those people that want to get into this industry, now it's here, if they want to control the rails of the stable coins, then they just need to control the blockchains that operate off proof of stake. So there may be a bias towards proof of stake. Now, hopefully it happens on Bitcoin Lightning, which will have privacy enhancements and cheaper fees and be genuinely decentralized. But there's a risk that it may happen on the alternative proof of stake change. And I think incentives align to that happening, which is why I hold some of my position in ETH, for example, so that I can benefit from the fees that are generated, convert into Bitcoin or whatever it may be. And you get a hedge because I want to be in a position where no matter what happens in the world, I'm okay. And that's the idea behind hedges. And so you could make an argument that a strategic reserve would include stakes in the major proof of stake networks to be strategically important in case everything goes onto a stablecoin standard. And we end up with the ability to take on the fractional reserve banks through stablecoins, which is the next battle. Bitcoin strategic reserves taking on the central bank, stablecoins taking on the fractional reserve system, and then defining who actually regulates those, which is the market, market strategy or market timing. Who's going to regulate those will be depending on, because those are centralized types of chains as well. But anyway, you could make an argument that for stablecoin strategic reasons, you might want to own some of those tokens. Okay, so that's more like a strategic stockpile because you're holding a stockpile in case something goes wrong. And that is the definition of a stockpile. So strategic reserves allows you to engage in future currency wars as Bitcoin becomes important to all jurisdictions. A strategic stockpile would be owning some of the proof of stake coins so that you can make sure the stablecoin network is certainly controlled. But, putting XRP and Solana and all of these different things, really, because those are pre-mined, it's pure extraction. So you can't justify using taxpayers' money in order to purchase any of those tokens. It's crony capitalism to the highest degree. They were pre-mined, and now they're selling them using taxpayers. It's not taxpayers' money, let's face it. It's using inflation and some taxpayers' money. And that's why if you want to do that, you have to do it through a sovereign wealth fund, which is the third element. A sovereign wealth fund is where you have a cash flow or you have wealth like through exporting oil or gas or resources. And then you have excess surplus reserves that you then want to invest strategically. And so you could say we'd like these blockchains to be built in America, and therefore we'll invest through our sovereign wealth fund in order to attract companies to build their blockchains within America. And that is the three-tiered structure that has become very obvious and apparent. And based upon the mechanism of publishing and getting feedback, it's pretty much exactly where the US ended up. Amazingly, the model has been set, and it could not have been set better. And those idiots that were expecting the government to buy 1 million Bitcoin right away and are now selling their Bitcoin because they're essentially fiat currency thinkers rather than buying Bitcoin into corrections are on the wrong side of the trade all over again. And that is because the market completely misinterpreted the power of what actually did get set up. Now, what is this? This could be, if it was set up correctly, strategically, a takeover of much of the stakes of the proof-of-stake networks. That's why Bitcoin proof of work is the way for us to free ourselves from the oppression of corporate takeover or from government takeover or from central bank takeover, which is the mission. Now, proof of stake will go through exactly that. And it will, essentially be a network for stable coins in order to allow the government to borrow more. And that will cause problems to the central, the banking system. And it will enrich the venture capitalists and the shitcoin casinos and all the exchanges and stuff. That's why, essentially, rather than messing around with all these alternatives, we started funding exchanges and getting equity in exchanges. So whatever happens in the market, the exchanges will benefit from that. And this is the construct of, some of the things that I'll be teaching later this year. We've set a date by this way to start the free video series Bitcoin Wealth Builder program. Going to be starting in June. And hopefully there'll be no further delays, but we're putting this all together anyway. We did this after every halving cycle where I publish online exactly how I invest, free for anyone to see. And then we analyze what happened in the whole cycle so you can see, even starting from scratch. I said, right, well, I'll invest live, but what would I do if I were starting from scratch? Because people always come to me, yeah, Simon, you were there right from the beginning when it was $3. And I say to them, yes, but I would do the same if I were starting from scratch today. And so I'll make sure I do that again in June. If you are not a member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, it's a free portal where I back up all these videos, and you can see the previous one that I did like 4 years ago, 5 years ago after the last halving. And you can get my book from 2011, the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin, all completely free. Head over to simondixon.com, hit that yellow button, and you'll be on the mailing list. And I make sure that you are in that membership portal where I release all these things as well to make sure everyone's done. But anyway, the complaint was that taxpayer money, shouldn't be funding these investments, and that's quite right. It should be done by what they actually announced, which is they called it market neutral. And so, tax neutral, I think is the word. I'll go through the exact wording because it's very important. But tax neutral means take assets that the government already has and convert some of them to Bitcoin if you want to accumulate a Bitcoin position. So one of the examples is gold, because it was confiscated from the American people after the Federal Reserve created a pump and dump in the roaring 20s and crashed the market to accumulate the assets in the 1930s that led to the Great Depression. And then in 33, it was demanded that all Americans need to hand in their gold. And now they're requiring an audit that hasn't been done to find out whether the gold is still in Fort Knox. But you could take that gold that is currently priced at $42 as per law, fiat, and you could actually reprice it to the market. And then you could use that in order to accumulate Bitcoin. That's $500 billion right there if you wanted. But also you could use strategic strategies. For example, at the moment, and I'll cover more of this in the macro and geopolitical section, America and Europe are in a proxy war, because that is what the Ukraine war was. It was a CI operation, as everybody that's been following this on Bitcoin Hard Talk already knows, in order to make Europe dependent upon American gas that is very expensive, that led to the sacrificing of the European economy, while it led to rampant inflation, and the proof-of-weapons network was used in order to take down big players in the crypto market. Some of the fake implants like SBF from FTX use that in order to then use the corruption at the SEC to wipe out a bunch of companies and then approve a Bitcoin ETF so that BlackRock can fool you into not self-custody your Bitcoin, but giving it to BlackRock instead. And that was a very strategic strategy. The Federal Reserve, if you go through its history, has done this approximately 20 times in order to fool you out of your assets, because it is a globalist institution that came from European bankers that co-opted American bankers in order to do exactly what the Bank of England did to England, which is make it broke, asset strip it, and hand over to the assets to the oligarchs and the shareholders of the central bank. Well, anyway, you could use that in order to buy Bitcoin, and therefore you do not use taxpayers' money. But if you wanted to launch an attack on UK, for example, remember that happened when Liz Truss broke the UK pension system, and she had to retire after 40 days because the Bank of England said, we need to do a strategic bailout of your policy, so therefore we're going to wipe you out and replace you with, I think it was Rishi Sunak next. Can't remember exactly who was next. I forget. You know, the Bank of England and they've just turned over. You know, the corrupt lobby, the crony capitalism just turns over prime ministers in the UK. Keir Starmer is the latest one. Really shilling for the European Central Bank agenda to take over the Fed's proof-of-weapons network in this war. And you could, for example, fight back against that if you wanted. And you could say, I'm going to sell UK gilts if they had some of them in their strategic reserves. And that would create a crash in the UK gilt market. And then you could use it to buy Bitcoin. And you can essentially use it for the same types of currency wars. But everybody can do that. And that is the beauty of Bitcoin. The countries that build their strategic reserves will have the strategic strategies to fight against the remnants of the proof-of-weapons network tools like gilts and like treasuries and various other things, which is why El Salvador has led the charge. And now America is doing it. And now the rest of the world can do it before they do it bigger, do it faster, do it better. And remember, America is a $27 trillion economy, but it's $36 trillion of debt. Revenue is vanity. Profit is sanity. The reason that Russia won, even though it's a much smaller economy, is because it's 22% debt to GDP and it utilizes its vast oil resources. We'll go through a bit more about that. And that was the war that was waged. It was to take out Russia and weaken Europe. But now they're in a strategic retreat and dismantling the euro dollar, which is the construct that this war was all about. Anyway, we'll cover more on that anyway. So you could use that. You sell UK gilts in order to buy Bitcoin. And then you could say, well, we don't want you to go to war. And therefore you could have those types of currency war policies if you are the first. And that is the game theory. Power comes from those that adopt the Bitcoin strategic reserves earlier, just like those who were buying Bitcoin earlier, they have more power, lobby power if they wanted, than everyone else right now. And that is still early because you are front running the strategic reserves. Anyway, you can use it, to rebalance your portfolio strategically. And that is why Bitcoin is so different from everything else. Right. So right after that, we had the next announcement, which pumped the market again. So basically, Trump came out and said that he is going to unveil the US Bitcoin reserve strategy at the White House crypto summit, which is the one that's happening today after BitcoinHardTalk. Sorry, that wasn't Trump. That came out from the Commerce Secretary of the Trump administration under Howard Lutnick. And Howard Lutnick is Cantor Fitzgerald. He's the reason why Tether's got a seat around the table, because he is custodying that. And in this crony capitalism, asset stripping economy that America currently is right now, as it does these strategic retreats and hands over all the assets, and you get to protect yourself with Bitcoin, rather than being on the wrong side, as all of these corrupt crony capitalist politicians are stripping all of America's assets and handing it over to themselves, just like Trump is doing right now, in the name of MAGA, of course, as we transition to this more regional power now that America is no longer a global power as a result of losing the Russian proxy war. Okay, so then what came out? Well, then we had our market pump and dumps, and you can see the PR in that narrative. Obviously, America is a PR economy. It's all about sharing narratives, fake it till you make it, and then manifesting it into existence, and then, that's kind of how things work, and you're seeing it in the Trump administration. Now, what happened next? Well, Trump then signed an executive order to establish, this time, not a strategic crypto reserve, but a strategic Bitcoin reserve. That happened yesterday. And if you're not following me on X, by the way, you get all these updates in real time, and you can ask me questions when I'm on Spaces as well, so we can engage more. So make sure you follow me on X. But that was the next move. Okay, now what does that mean? Well, now we're moving towards exactly how it should be. But of course, the crony capitalists benefited from the pump and dumps that happened as a result of changing the language from crypto strategic reserve to Bitcoin strategic reserve. Then the crypto czar, David Sachs, came out, and he was the one, when Trump signed the executive order, Trump was saying, so you think this is how we should be doing it? And he was, yes, this is the way, which is awesome. He came out and started hinting at, by the way, the US government sold 195,000 Bitcoin. Now, that when they sold it, and remember who they sold it to, there were all those auctions. Where did it come from? It came from the Silk Road. So let me just give you a little bit of history. So Bitcoin was created to take down the Federal Reserve and the Proof-of-Weapons network. One of the first use cases was taking down the intelligence agency drug cartels like the CIA and MI6 and Mossad that created this network of jurisdictions to allow for the flow of drug trafficking, human trafficking, pedophilia, blackmail rings, as we're finding out in these drops. And so a gentleman called Ross Ulbright decided to use Bitcoin in order to create a decentralized marketplace. And you could use Bitcoin in order to transact with people in a peer-to-peer way where there was no centralized server and there was no centralized controlled currency. And this created, a safe way for those, I don't endorse this, but a safe way for those that decided, rather than buy drugs from gangsters, buy them online where there's a safe way of doing it. I don't need to go in the streets and risk being shot. And I don't need to accept whatever my local gangster is willing to give me. There could be quality control and ratings. And it created this marketplace where it was a lot safer to engage in pure, natural types of things rather than all the chemically induced ones. And that was one of the first use cases of Bitcoin. And so the strategic reserves that America's using right now were the confiscated Bitcoin from taking down Ross Ulbright, because he tried to compete with the intelligence agencies that are still to this day the real reason why there is a fentanyl crisis within America. Because the Fed creates the wars, that then sends people over to fight those wars. When they come back mentally ill because they're killing, for the benefit of profit without knowing it, because they thought they were doing it for their country, and they have to engage in acts of killing children and civilians as comes from this network, they come back mentally ill. America doesn't look after them anymore because the Proof-of-Weapons network is for the profits of the military-industrial complex, not the victims of the military-industrial complex. They end up mentally ill, homeless, and they need to buy drugs. And so they end up with the CIA's chemically induced ones rather than actually the safe ones. And so they took out that network, and then they auctioned off the Bitcoin, and they took basically the 195,000 Bitcoin, they sold it for $366 million over the last decade. Today, David Sachs told us that if that Bitcoin, if they had kept it, it would be worth $7 billion today. So it was hinting around that. And isn't it ironic that the Trump administration released Ross Ulbright, pardoned him after 10 years of essentially creating a marketplace to take down the CIA? He is now free, but America is still confiscating those coins in order to build their strategic reserves. Even saying that they have 200,000 Bitcoin when they only really have 100,000, because one of the companies that we bailed out from a hack, which the person behind those hack is now in prison, which was funded through the Ukrainian Proof-of-Weapons network, taken down by the FBI, and then there were corrupt FBI agents that got arrested and now in prison because they tried to steal all the Bitcoin, because they're part of the drug trafficking and cartel networks that exist. And so they ended up in prison. And in 2016, 119,000 of those Bitcoin was hacked from customers of Bitfinex. And now we've gone full circle. At Bank to the Future, we helped victims of that hack. They ended up with equity in Bitfinex. And now the coins have been retrieved, and they need to do an audit to find out who owns those coins. But there was a court case that said Bitfinex owns those coins. So those coins are now returning to Bitfinex shareholders, which were some of the original, I'm a shareholder, full disclosure, and the Bank to the Future shareholders that we supported in recovering from that. And America's trying to take those and say, yeah, we need to audit it because we're not sure who owns them. But they are already over 100,000 of them belong to Bitfinex. And Howard Lutnick, crony capitalist, Secretary of Commerce, makes sure that Tether gets a seat at the table in the White House meeting, because now America wants to launch its own stable coins, and Trump created his own stable coin through World Liberty Financial, who's also sat at the table as all these organizations asset strip America. And hopefully you're protecting yourself with Bitcoin as we transition to this crony capitalist, and all of America's resources are poured over to artificial intelligence, and we hand it over to the stablecoin issuers that are now taking all the big data and taking all the resources and pulling it into artificial intelligence. This is why you need to protect yourself. Make as much money as you can over the next 10 years in fiat currency, because artificial intelligence will have your job when it's combined with robotics. And Bitcoin is the way of beating the proof-of-weapons network. Get on the right side of history. And if you get on the wrong side, you will be a universal basic income recipient, paying off your debt using a central bank digital currency, or you will be a pawn for the stablecoin issuers that control all the artificial intelligence data, as the stablecoin issuers take over the government, depending on whether they allow the central bank to win or the technocrats to win. That is the battle of the future. Bitcoin is the solution. Okay, anyway, so then what happens? Well, David Sachs then came out and clarified the day before today's meeting at the White House. And what did he say? Let me read through some of the quotes. So remember what I've told you earlier. This is why the devil is in the detail. Take your time to watch Bitcoin Hard Talk each week. Now, do me a favor. If you think that this is not the type of information you can get anywhere else, we have been oppressed by YouTube, because in the geopolitical section, I revealed the truth that later gets revealed by USAID and everything right now. But I got severely suppressed. I need to get my YouTube account reviewed. If I get to 100,000 subscribers, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, say, oh, I get a blue check. And then the blue check means I go for a manual review, and then they can say, well, you were actually telling the truth. It just seemed like a conspiracy theory at the time. And then we can get our message out to many more people, and I can start ranking in the algorithms at the moment. Right now, I just rely upon those on my mailing list and those that come in and tune in and hit the subscribe button, the bell symbol, all, and then they get an email. So if you can help me get to 100,000, please do that as well. As a backup, I put everything on Bitcoin Hard Talk, so join my mailing list. And as a backup, I also put everything on Rumble, which now Tether has made a strategic investment in order to try and make sure that a centralized company gets some more free speech. So go follow me on Rumble as well. So whatever happens, and I'll also back it up on Nostr, the decentralized network, as that gets more traction. All the things we have to do to maintain freedom of speech. Anyway, what did he also say? So the reserve will be capitalized with Bitcoin owned by the federal government. That means not owned by the Federal Reserve, owned by Treasury. And it will be Bitcoin. And it will be the Bitcoin that was forfeited as part of criminal and civil asset forfeitures proceedings. Now, obviously, this incentivized the criminals at the government to forfeit more. So that's why we hold it in self-custody, so they don't get forfeited and we stay on the right side of the network and law, obviously. But that's why you don't hold it with BlackRock, because if they want to strategically take your Bitcoin, they just nationalize the BlackRock ETF, or you don't hold it through MicroStrategy that's got 500,000 Bitcoin, because they might nationalize that. And you can see Michael Saylor is clearly an American asset right now, because he has pivoted to the exact narrative away from what he used to say around the crypto vision and various other things. Once you become that big, you become an asset. So, China, they just blatantly say it. You can't become that big. In America, you just become a covert asset. So they work on the same model, and it is basically the same thing, but one's deceitful, one's out in the open. Anyway, and obviously America, the big distinction is they do hold free speech. But right now, the First Amendment is being called into question. I'll cover that more in the macro and geopolitical section. There are violations of the First Amendment. Be careful. In Europe, our freedom of speech is being eroded through surveillance. But you got to keep hold, if you're an American, of your First and Second Amendments. And they are being eroded by Israel. And I'll go through exactly what happened this week to take those away. Make sure you get ahead of these things. Right. What else did they say? This means it will not cost the taxpayers a dime. Okay, so they've said the forfeited Bitcoin will be transferred over and it won't cost taxpayers anything. And it's Bitcoin. Brilliant. That's exactly how it should be done. Next thing it said, it is estimated that the US government owns about 200,000 Bitcoin. Sorry, no, you don't. About 100,000 of those are going to Bitcoin, which means you're going to have to get a bigger position. How do you get that bigger position? By following exactly what I said, not by printing money, but by strategically using. Now you're in an austerity environment. Anyway, the 200,000 Bitcoin. However, there has never been a complete audit. So it's prepping you that we know about 100,000 of these about to go back to Bitfinex shareholders, and there's only about 100,000 left, which means that China is the largest sovereign government that owns Bitcoin, because they do have 200,000. So America's going to want to catch up. Who's next? UK has got about 60,000 that is seized. The Kingdom of Bhutan has accumulated about 11,000 and is mining by using its hydro energy to make sure it gets as much Bitcoin. El Salvador's buying one every day for about 6,000 Bitcoin. Germany sold its 50,000 Bitcoin and is going down the Proof-of-Weapons network rather than peaceful proof of work. And then those are the main sovereigns, and Ukraine has a bunch of them as well, which was laundered through FTX and even through Celsius as well. A bunch of the client Bitcoin was used in order to raise finance for Ukraine, because Alex Majinsky, who is facing his going down in May, was an Israeli agent that is also originally born in Ukraine, and made sure that some of those client assets ended up in Ukraine, and made sure that the co-founders in Israel are using their right to return to ensure that they're getting away with their crimes. And Majinsky was the guy that is now going to be trialed in March after stealing all the Bitcoin anyway. So the audit is, so they're basically prepping up. And then it says the EO executive order directs a full accounting of the federal government, of the government's digital asset holdings. Okay, so that's where we'll get full disclosure. Who's got the keys? Where are they held? Who is it they entitled to? That will all come out. Now, obviously, that's where Harry Lutnick uses some crony capitalism to ensure that Bitfinex gets it back, which is the rightful owner. But otherwise, the government would have just forfeited it. That's what happens when you use, put your Bitcoin in storage that way. Right, next part. It said the US will not sell any Bitcoin deposited into the reserve. So those Bitcoin won't be sold anymore. Unlike the Biden administration that was selling them, and the previous administrations that were selling them, it will be kept as a store of value, which is what Bitcoin is, because it is proof of work. And it is not got a pre-mine, and it's not connected or controlled by any one individual. It's got a network of nodes. It's got the largest security behind it, and that is distributed around the world with no political affiliation connected to any one country. The reserve is like a digital Fort Knox for the cryptocurrency for cryptocurrency called digital gold. So now it is distinguishing between what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is digital gold. It is a reserve for the other parts of the ecosystem, i.e. the proof of stake networks that are going to be doing stablecoins. As I've always taught right from the beginning, if anyone's been a long-term follower of Bitcoin Hard Talk. Right, what else did it say? Premature sales of Bitcoin have already cost the US taxpayer over $17 billion in lost value. That's because they were auctioned off. Who made that money? The VCs that bought them. Oh God, I'm forgetting. Pantera Capital, I believe, was one that won the auction. And what's his name? The guy with the big eyebrows as a VC early investor. Why have I forgotten? Sorry, I'm blanking out on his name. Many of the companies that we invested in, he was really early investing. Anyway, there was Digital Currency Group with Barry Silbert, and then there was another one. Okay, it will come back later. Anyway, use the comment section. I'll remember it later. In the comment section, who was the guy with the big eyebrows that was early investor that ended up buying from the auction a bunch of the Silk Road Bitcoins in auction? And I remember he bought them for about $600, and then the price crashed to $300, and they're still there, I think. Anyway, so now the federal government will have a strategy to maximize the value of its holdings. The secretaries of Treasury, i.e. Treasury, not Federal Reserve, and Commerce are all authorized to this is the important part the market didn't hear, to develop a budget neutral, budget neutral was the word, not tax neutral, budget neutral strategies for acquiring additional Bitcoin, provided that those strategies have no incremental costs on American taxpayers. Now, if you go out and you try and get taxpayers to agree to buy in Bitcoin, it will never get through. If you already have strategic assets and strategic reserves, and you can rebalance them in order to acquire Bitcoin, then it is tax neutral, and it doesn't cost the American people anything. Now, the assets that are held in reserves are significantly greater than any budget you could ever imagine. If you could get a budget, even Ukraine, even Israel has taken $350 billion directly from the American taxpayer. Obviously, it got spent back into the military-industrial complex to prop up the petrodollar and create violence all across the Middle East as a strategic element to prop up the dollar to push out the proof-of-weapons network. But Israel got $350 billion. There's more assets than that in strategic reserves. So even if you manage to successfully lobby for the entire budget that Israel gets, you still wouldn't have as much as the potential by doing it this way. And so the idiots that don't know how to read this thing were selling their Bitcoin because they're fiat thinkers, thinking, oh, well, I thought the government was going to buy a million Bitcoin, because they're short-term price manipulators or they're on the wrong side of it. You've got to get with the program. There's not much time left. You won't probably have a job in 10 years with the way that artificial intelligence and robotics are going. We are in a seismic shift in the world right now in this transition. You need to be preparing now. You need to be thinking long-term. You need to make the right moves. Okay. So if you're an idiot, then you would have been selling your Bitcoin into that, and we would have been accumulating Bitcoin Hard Talk people getting some Bitcoin under $90,000 again, and wherever it goes next. So it doesn't cost taxpayers anything, but this is a much, much bigger budget. And they'll be able to use Bitcoin as a strategic asset, and other countries then can do the same as we enter into these different type of operations. So we are crashing when people use Bitcoin. We're swapping the old assets. We're swapping the proof-of-weapons gilts. We're swapping the proof-of-weapons treasuries. We're swapping the gold contracts with paper exposure on top of it. We're swapping the seized ships of rich people. We're swapping gold that was confiscated and swapping it for Bitcoin, which is boycotting the occupation of the central banking proof-of-weapons network slowly but surely. And then you can use stable coins in order to transition out of full reserve banking when the whole system breaks. The oppressors will use CBDCs. The other oppressors will hand over the industry to crony capitalists and allow those to become the PayPal mafia, stablecoin issuers that have companies like Peter Thiel's Palantir, which is using AI in order to kill people around the world, selling contracts to governments. Those will be the future stablecoin issuers. But anyway, we can create decentralized AI, just like we created Bitcoin, decentralized stablecoins, all the things that we can do as we transition and have a resistance against that ever more centralization. Anyway, the other beauty about this, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm speculating here. I reckon this could get passed without having to go via Congress. So you don't have the bank lobbyists like Elizabeth Warren, those that contribute to Operation Choke Point 2.0. And now Gary Gensler has gone from the SEC. We got the corrupt Federal Reserve agents that are, doing the bidding of the bank lobby. They may not actually get a say in this because it's not requiring additional budget. So you might be able to bypass Congress in order to achieve this. And so therefore it could start right away. Now, they're not going to suddenly announce we're buying Bitcoin, because that would create a game theoretical event that would pump the price of Bitcoin like crazy. They're going to be doing this in the less transparent networks. The less transparent networks required BlackRock. It required the banking system. It required the fiat currency Proof-of-Weapons network, so they can slowly accumulate. And obviously, because the Israeli lobby and the banking lobby, they'll make sure that they don't get Bitcoin direct like El Salvador. They'll make sure it's custodied in Bank of New York Mellon through a paper version of Bitcoin IOU, through BlackRock, so that if those networks ever wanted to be weaponized against America, a globalist agenda could wipe that and rug pull them from the American people. And because they control the Congress, they can use those networks in order to get it through. Anyway, they can hedge against it. But the net result is this is probably a larger budget for America to push its Bitcoin strategic reserve than it ever would have been if you went through the route that everyone was selling, where you just say, get permission to buy 1 million Bitcoin or whatever it is. And this is in the Cynthia Lummis bill anyway. So you could do it through the Trump administration, and then you could get it through a bill, just like the Securities Act of 1930 lasted decades and decades and is still there today, just like the Investment Advisors or the Investment Company Act of 1940 is still there today. You can codify it through the Cynthia Lummis bill. So then even beyond the Trump administration, the strategic reserve asset goes through, and the Federal Reserve cannot use its lobby power to take it away. So still carry on. And even if that doesn't happen, the states can still do it so that they can become independent as well and have a tool to protect themselves from the Federal Reserve as well. Anyway, this can now be strategically used in currency wars, even the dismantling of the euro dollar and petrodollar. So if the EU wants strength right now, it would align with Russia, get cheap gas that can go into Germany. It would then negotiate and align with Ukraine, get its rare earth deal. It would then become a net exporter to America, make it important between BRICS and America. And it would build AI data centers, rebuild its manufacturing base, use its artificial intelligence within the UK tech sector. And it could use Bitcoin strategic reserves to free itself from the dismantling of the European Union and stop the European Central Bank, which is a conduit that is a Fed first policy. And when the ECB needs to be weaponized by the Bank for International Settlements to take down America through the dismantling of the Fed, countries can free themselves by buying their own Bitcoin strategic reserves. The Middle East can use their sovereign wealth funds to repurpose Bitcoin mining, and BRICS can use it in order to build a distributed network of global South that want to pull the fact that they've all been the victims of the Proof-of-Weapons network and decide that they'll work with their partners that have been building them, like China, rather than their partners that have been overthrowing them and killing their people, like America, from the Federal Reserve. And so they can then have power by using Bitcoin and harnessing it. We are just getting started. You are still early in this journey. Okay. Right. There was also a further quote. In addition, the executive order establishes a US digital asset stockpile. That means exactly what I said earlier. The stockpile is if you confiscate assets and shitcoins are there, put them in the stockpile. Okay, so now you've got a bunch of the shitcoin casino in the stockpile. They may have value. They'll dump on top of you. Kind of the model that happens with the pre-mine. America just confiscates some of the pre-mine so they can dump on you. And consisting of digital assets other than Bitcoin, and these are forfeited, so they're not buying them, and it doesn't include Bitcoin. Bitcoin can't be sold, but the shitcoins can be in criminal or civil proceedings. Okay, so they can confiscate the shitcoins, put it in the strategic stockpile, and if they want, convert it to Bitcoin that can't be sold, and then the Bitcoin can make up the strategic reserve as part of this strategy. So if you're American, get ready for seizures. The government is being completely in harness, just like the SEC. The mafia network goes around to companies and finds them and makes sure that if you're incentivized to pay the fine, and then they can pay to grow and grow and grow. And in the end, it's just a racketeering organization for, pretending that they're doing it for consumer protection. But now this is exactly how it should be done. This is really smart stuff. Every country, watch what America is doing right now. They are setting the protocol, the constitution for how to do this and free yourself from a central bank, but then make sure you free yourself from the technocrats as well. Anyway, but you just free yourself by doing it yourself rather than relying on your government. But we still need to leave somewhere. So hopefully they can use this in order to make sure that there's less violence in the world. Right, what else? It says the government will not acquire additional assets for the stockpile beyond those obtained through forfeiture proceedings. So they won't be purchasing. It just means that they won't buy or sell shitcoins, but it's the perfect way to do it. This is exactly how you do it. Exactly how you do it. And if you want to do strategic shitcoinery, then you can do it through the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and you can say, we think it's strategic to have you over here so that we can get BlackRock to own your stake so that we can build the network and we can control a chunk of the network, because everybody fell for the psyop of transitioning from proof of work to proof of stake. But you can be smarter. You can benefit from that by using the stakes in order to convert to Bitcoin as part of this is getting into Bitcoin Wealth Builder territory that we'll be covering in June later this year. Just make sure you're a member of simondixon.com so you don't miss how to do these things. And I'll just share exactly how I did it and what the results were. Okay, so this is step one. You build your Bitcoin strategic reserves. Then you have a tool at the right point to end the Fed. How do you end the Fed? You prove that they stole all of America's gold. You audit that, and you do what they did at USAID. You show all the corruption. You stamp it out. You say you're taking on the deep state. You then audit it, and then you realize it's a bankrupt institution, a foreign occupation, and you take down the system if you choose. I'm not saying that's going to happen because the deep state doesn't want that to happen. But then you can reverse the violence behind the petrodollar. That's what they did with USAID, expose the corruption, reverse it, and the euro dollar, which has exposed the corruption and reverse it. And we enter into this new world order that we are experiencing that I've been covering on Bitcoin Hard Talk. What do they need to do next in phase two? Well, next you need to implement stable coins in order to compete with banking. So you get your stablecoin regulations. Then you probably use your strategic stockpile to control proof of stake. But if people are smart, they'll make sure that some of those stable coins, if you want to be a world reserve currency in the future, it will probably be taken over by AI and it will probably use Bitcoin. And then the one that exerts the most freedom rather than the central bank digital currency is the one that will be the future world reserve currency in a Bitcoin AI and CBDC world. So we continue to build the network like Lightning, where stablecoins can exist on top of Lightning through the Taproot upgrades. And then people can lock up their Bitcoin and earn yield on top of Bitcoin as that network grows by providing liquidity for decentralized stablecoins as well. all to come. We've got this all to build. We are right at the beginning of this transition, but we only have 5 to 10 years before I think AI gets really, really funky. So you need to get the stablecoin regulations, and then you can do an attack. Now, where is the Fed going to try and exert influence? Well, they're either going to say we'll do CBDCs, which means hand over the entire banking network to the Fed, or they're going to say we'll make sure that we control some of the stakes through our strategic stockpiles, or they're going to say let's control the stakes and let's actually align with the technocrat companies that are going to be the future stablecoin issuers as well. And so that lobby pressure will come from the third thing America needs to do, as I've always covered, the market structure side. That is, who's going to regulate who? Is it the Commodities and Futures Commission? Is it the SEC? How co-opted are they by the Federal Reserve? What about FDIC and the operator of the currency, the OCC? The Fed is going to want FDIC, OCC, Fed control of stablecoins. And you as Americans need to make sure that it doesn't end up that way, because then they will co-opt the stablecoins in order to create a neo-Federal Reserve and a neo-technocracy by harnessing all the artificial intelligence data that comes from all these audits, and use that big data as America transitions to a world of artificial intelligence, because they're retreating because China is winning the robotics war, and America needs to end all these wars because it's getting distracted because China's controlling the assets by collaboratively working with people rather than use the economic hitmen at the IMF that's destroying America's relationship with people based upon a unipolar world as we transition to multipolar. Strategic retreat, and that's what needs to be done in order to make sure that happens. So stablecoins next to protect them from the Fed, OCC, and FDIC. Ban central bank digital currencies. That's already been doing. And then you can build your sovereign wealth fund in order to make strategic investments to the companies that you want to be in your country. And that can be done based upon, getting strategic assets that build a surplus, or however it wants to be structured. Segregated cash flows. Why do you think America's negotiating rare earth deals? Because it's taking its final bit of neo-colonialism and trying to get as many deals to probably fund its sovereign wealth fund, so then it can start to use and maintain regional power to win the AI race in this world, in this 5 to 10 year transition that we're going to go through. And what are we going to do? We're going to build it all on top of Bitcoin and make sure it's decentralized so that it actually becomes bottom up, removes borders, removes the ability to tax, and allows us to enter into the world that we should have been in the first place, where essentially we have decentralized, geopolitically strategic Bitcoin proof of work that can harness in a world of peace if we choose. I know it's not going to solve anything, but fixed money fix many things in the world. We still need to change. How will it change humankind when we're not oppressed by a debt-based Ponzi scheme? When you are not oppressed by a debt-based Ponzi scheme and you're not deep in debt, will that bring out the best in you or the worst in you? How are we going to train this artificial intelligence online? If you're the worst version of yourself because you're in debt slavery thanks to inflation and the debt-based Ponzi scheme, are you going to be putting better content out there on social media that will be training our artificial intelligence, or is it going to be worse? These are the hard questions, but protect yourself with Bitcoin, and we can try and fix corporations and governments and sovereigns and central banks, but do it from a position of strength and freedom as well. And that's what I want for everybody. Own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. Keep going. Don't fall for the psyops. Watch Bitcoin Hard Talk every week and share this with your family. Like, subscribe. Make sure more people get the message. I need your help. We got more people to say. I don't want this to be just be a small group of people that are prepared for this because they're following the media, and the media is funded and corrupt as to spread the message that doesn't help you, but helps those people that are benefiting from the Proof-of-Weapons network. Okay. So now that we know that, now that we got that announcement, the next thing they announced is that we have the meeting today, which will be after Bitcoin Hard Talk. And what they did is they leaked the guest list. Now, I'm not sure if it's the actual guest list, it's speculation, but I was very proud of the Bank to the Future team that we had 7 of our portfolio companies that couldn't get VC funding, were crazy misfit companies, and are now sat around the White House because many of our investors contributed to their funding round and allowed them to become as big as they are. Now, some of them became companies that I'm not even strategically aligned with. However, it still made me feel good. And many of those are on our secondary market at Bank to the Future that are going to probably be going public in the Trump administration now that it has a more friendly environment. And just to give those names, to give shout out to the companies that Bank to the Future supported funding, and some of them are on our secondary market, and the team that helped get these companies to where they are: Kraken, Coinbase, Robinhood, Exodus, Ripple Labs. Don't like the direction they went in, but anyway, if it ends up that their corruption ends up with a load of stable coins based upon XRP, at least the Ripple Lab shareholders will benefit from that because they got 50% of those tokens. Bitfinex, which also ended up creating Tether, and Circle, which is the second largest stable coin. And then we've got all the chain people like the Ethereums, the Solanas, the Cardanos and Charles Hodgkinsons. And they're meant to be there as well. Anyway, just wanted to say that it's a wild industry. It's amazing to actually see. And it is a massively changing time. So America is setting the model. They got it right first, I believe. But it doesn't mean they will execute it right. It doesn't mean that the Federal Reserve won't sabotage it. It doesn't mean that intelligence agencies won't try and take out the leadership of this administration, because every time there has been a movement against the Fed, it has led to death and assassination. God willing, that doesn't happen. But I'm just saying that is the normal pattern. So we need to be careful. And you know that if that ever happens, they'll blame it on Iran. And then they'll say, oh, yeah, we need to come after Iran and we need to go back into our old model. And we can destabilize the whole Middle East. And then Russia needs to fight. And then China strategically aligned, and Iran and Russia have a defense deal. And then they'll push China to, the Biden administration model where we were before. There is a country that may want to do that. We'll cover that more in the geopolitical section today. You need to make sure it don't. So we have had 5 states that have rejected their Bitcoin strategic reserve bill so far. They don't get freedom from the Fed. Hopefully it happens at the federal level, but I think things will change now with the sequence of events that are coming from today. So those 5 states, I don't want to miss them. They are not having freedom. They will come back, capitulate later, and have to buy at a higher price. Shame on those countries. They'll regret it and they'll come back. Seen it time and time again in my 15 years. 2011, 14 years of being involved in this industry, since speaking at the first Bitcoin conference and writing the first published book to include Bitcoin Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. But there are still 30 states that are trying, and it looks like Texas is making progress there. And there are many, many states. So the states will decide, and you should be engaging in that political process if you want your state to be able to free itself in this transition. Of course, the crony capitalism continues. Eric Trump, Trump's son, he came out and said, traditional finance better catch up with crypto or it will quickly become extinct. And of course, World Liberty Financial, the company that built on top of ETH, that has stable coins, that is around the table at the White House, that has DeFi hard forks top of Ethereum, that launched their own governance token once they wiped out the SEC, so the SEC doesn't come for them, and is probably connected to Trump's meme coins and pump and dump schemes that I warned you against, that have crashed about 70 or 75, 80% now, and were involved in those sniper operations. And then his other company, his social network, that's doing other TradFi NFT marketplaces and launching Bitcoin ETFs, of course, they're going to benefit from everything. So that Trump can hand over his legacy to his own companies, as all these people sat around White House fight to try and asset strip America of their assets as we transition to crony capitalism based upon a technocracy, as the PayPal mafia become more important than the Federal Reserve, depending on which direction it goes. A couple of other things that came out. Anti-crypto or anti-Bitcoin Peter Schiff said that President Trump has helped pull off one of the biggest crypto rug pulls of all time and calls on Congress to investigate it. Well, of course, you can agree with some of that because there was a lot of manipulation. I'm not sure who, definitely the people hanging around with Trump were engaged in that, but get used to it. This is the easiest government in history to follow the money, get ahead of the trends, and understand what's coming next. And in the post, it's pretty interesting. Peter Schiff, for the first time, admits Bitcoin is digital gold. That was after my debate. If you didn't watch my debate, I believe if you look at the comments underneath it, it's on my YouTube channel. The comments underneath it said that of all the debates with Peter Schiff, this was the first time when he didn't have answers and he kept going down crazier and crazier things. If you think I won that debate, leave a comment below and let me know. But after that, there was that switch in narrative saying that it is digital gold. Now, he refuted that and said, no, I was just talking about what narrative Trump might portray. But anyway, it was after my debate, so I'll take credit for it, whether I deserve it or not. You let me know whether I deserve that credit, and you can watch the debate and see how his narrative changed after it. So, of course, the globalist institutions that use the Federal Reserve in order to approve the ETFs and use plants like SBF and FTX and Majinsky and Celsius. Of course, Blackrock is making sure that its fund have as much Bitcoin as possible. Now they successfully got the ETFs approved. And because they couldn't beat us, they had to join us. So BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, which is a lot more powerful than the US government, ended up with 50% of Ukraine, has been asset stripping assets all around the world, has ended up with all the voting shares in many of the companies through its ETFs and board controls and every other things. It is said that a Bitcoin ETF, ItBit, it is now going to be investing in its own Bitcoin ETF from some of its other funds. And so it's going to be allocating $150 billion model portfolio, basically to have an allocation in Bitcoin because it thinks it's an asset that needs to be in everyone's pension, which is a great thing for those that are in the pension. But unfortunately, you've got to hold it through BlackRock, which introduces the counterparty risk. And of course, they rigged the system to make sure that happens. Anyway. This is the first time that the world's largest asset manager is now saying that Bitcoin needs to be strategically allocated and is going around saying that there's risk off as well. So just to give you an idea of that, this inclusion involves basically allocating a small 1 to 2% of those assets to strategically buy Bitcoin via the ETF. But Satoshi saw this. He didn't make it proof of stake. He made it proof of work so that it doesn't matter who owns it. And you holding it in self-custody means that you get to opt out of the Federal Reserve System and the proof-of-weapons network that is perpetuated by globalist organizations like BlackRock. Right. So now the SEC has replaced out the corrupt Fed bidders. And we've got new leadership. All of the SEC lawsuits against many of our portfolio companies have dropped. And so the latest two to be dropped was the SEC dropped the lawsuit against Kraken and against Cumberland Mining as well. The SEC, which is being downsized because it's no longer doing, hopefully, I don't trust it, but hopefully the bidding of the Federal Reserve for these covert operations. The SEC is offering eligible employees $50,000 incentive to resign and retire by April the 4th. April the 2nd is when the strategic tariffs comes in play. April the 4th is when the downsizing. So we are literally witnessing the downsizing of the US government, the asset stripping of assets over to those that benefited from the Federal Reserve money printing, and the resignation of employees that's going to create a wave of unemployed into a world that's transitioning to artificial intelligence. Hence why the macro market was correcting. At the same time, the judges, they decided to rule in favor of Richard Hart from Hex. We covered that. No fan of that project, but anyway, the judge ruled in favor rather than the SEC. Not sure what the situation is with the SEC on that one. And the remnants of the Proof-of-Weapons network, like the IMF, they started to really drug some power, try to use some power to make sure that it uses and weaponizes its tools, which are slowly but surely becoming less and less powerful. As dollars will have less demand as we move to de-dollarization, meaning you can't be weaponized by the economic hitmen at the IMF and in order to create financial weapons of mass destruction that leads to death and destruction in your country. So anyway, it decided that it wants to show some influence against the global south, against the power through its dollar enslavement that it inflicted through Operation Gladio upon countries like El Salvador, and said the IMF demands that El Salvador stops buying Bitcoin as a condition for further funding. El Salvador got its final bit of debt because it didn't own enough Bitcoin. If it had owned more Bitcoin, it wouldn't have needed that $3.5 billion it had to take from the IMF. But the IMF incrementally said, right, I'll lend you 3.5 billion, but remove your Bitcoin as legal tender. El Salvador had to capitulate, but then it kept buying more and more Bitcoin. Now it's saying we won't lend to you again unless you stop buying Bitcoin. And El Salvador and Bukele can decide to continue its freedom and continue to buy more Bitcoin, and then eventually it can free itself from the IMF. If El Salvador caves and stops buying Bitcoin, then we know the IMF got to it. The economic hitmen won, and it could return it to covert operations like Operation Gladio, and then use network like its intelligence agencies at CIA, Mossad, and MI6 in order to try and create more and more war and return us to the old model, while the Trump administration is trying to win the AI race against China and asset strip America over to the technocrats. And so if El Salvador continues buying and does not take that loan, President Bukele has officially given the double, triple thumbs up to the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, and the economic hitmen and violence of the International Monetary Fund. If that happens and he keeps buying Bitcoin and never borrows again, the IMF is powerless. The IMF is dismantled. The IMF can be exposed, and it no longer has the power in order to exert the petrodollar and the eurodollar and the oppression of the global south, and BRICS can rebuild relationships and fight against the dollar, and hopefully utilizes Bitcoin. But it doesn't matter what happens next. We'll just keep borrowing it. We'll just keep covering it. So El Salvador and President Bukele show the world how it's done. America, show the world how to free itself from the Fed. BRICS, show the world how to harness Bitcoin in order to enter into multipolar. And Middle East, expel, show that we don't need to go to war, death, and destruction. And if America ends the Fed, defunds the corruption of the Israeli government, then Israel has to get on with its neighbors, as we are seeing in the geopolitical environment, have a two-state solution, end the war with Ukraine, and enter into what you could call a fourth turning and a world of economic prosperity, with Bitcoin regulating the countries together in a movement that could just wave and usher in the next wave. And it may call me ignorant, but everyone called me ignorant in 2011. But instead, those that got on board ended up freeing themselves from the system. Okay. Now, what happened with the next bit of game theory? So I'm not sure if these rumors are true, but having known David Bailey for a very long time, I met him in China many times when he was working with China, and met him in America many times when he was fighting against Barry Silbert and GBTC that was a weapon that was utilized for Operation Choke Point 2.0 to steal Bitcoin from people, and supported him in that initiative. But he started to release little hints around there. He released the hints around the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, around the leaks by David Bailey that China is moving at rapid pace in order to build their strategic reserves. In the future, if China does it, this could be the groundwork for solving the problem of how do you create a currency 40% backed by gold and make sure that a country doesn't default and end up holding its gold in an environment where it can be audited and it can have multi-signature transactions so that everybody is incentivized to have nodes where you can't default and you have to engage in diplomacy rather than war. BRICS could use that and use Bitcoin-backed settlement layer in order to do that. We shall see whether that happens, but these are very, very interesting things if China sets off that game theory, and then BRICS can have a global south, and then we can have Lightning Network built on top of Bitcoin strategic reserves across the global south. Now the IMF is weaponless, and now the Federal Reserve may be de-weaponized by America, and America is no longer unipolar. And this is the game theory that Bitcoin set in motion. Lightning stablecoins, take down all these different things. It is the most interesting time to be alive in financial history. So what else did we have? We had different governments saying, hold on, Belarus president, Lukashenko, he came out and he ordered the energy minister of Belarus to start mining. He said cryptocurrency. Soon he'll realize there's only one currency worth mining, which is Bitcoin. You could control some of the proof of stake network by jumping up validators, but harnessing energy in order to mine some Bitcoin so that it can be strategically important in the future. And it doesn't have to engage in covert operations where interference from Russia and the CIA and the KGB to decide which puppet governments get in charge. It can build back its sovereignty and see where that goes. The quote was that he said is, if it's profitable, let's do it. We have excess electricity. Let them mine this cryptocurrency and so on. And so that's what he said in the video. We also saw there was a documentary this week from the Kingdom of Bhutan, a very small country with a very small population that actually has the largest amount of per capita Bitcoin of any government in the world. And it is utilizing, it's building hydropower dams in order to mine Bitcoin, using incredibly innovative ways of making sure that its country has self-sovereignty and can build its new financial system built upon Bitcoin mining and repurposing energy in order to build itself and have its own industry. So it came out and it had a demonstration of how it's mining Bitcoin and how it's got the highest number of Bitcoin per capita in the world. And it showed a mining model that the Middle East could be using as a beta test, just like America could use El Salvador as a beta test. All of these different countries in the game theory can now use it as beta tests, build its settlement layers between, the Middle East can build a settlement layer between US and China or BRICS, which are both going to be engaged in AI races. And they could decide, we're going to price our oil in some BRICS currency, some US dollars, some Bitcoin. And then they could be the ones that decide how to, take down the petrodollar, for example, and instead build the petro Bitcoin. Why not? This model can be utilized because we don't need to align with one country anymore. We can put the world into some kind of currency harmony where the game theory of prisoner's dilemma and defaulting from diplomacy and peace are no longer worth it, because we have got, for the first time, digital hard sound money backed by the largest distributed supercomputer that is not politically aligned with any one country, where the game theory and prisoner's dilemma of defaulting upon diplomacy, peace, just like Bitcoin, you can't default upon the rules because it is set up in a way where there is no way to default from that. Fix money, fix the world. In the meantime, you get to front run, own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. And that's going to do it for episode Bitcoin Hard Talk 73 for the Bitcoin section in part 1. We're now going to run through the second section, which is the macro section. So if you enjoyed this video, please do me a favor. Get this out to as many people. We'll break this up into 3 videos if you like watching just one part of this. But if you're like me, I will try and make this so you can just in a few hours have everything you need rather than wasting hours and hours and hours going through all the different places. You can get it all, and then you can prepare to transition to a world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDC. So do me a favor. On this video, if you're watching a recording or live, put a comment below. Help my algorithm. Put the like. Give me a like, a subscribe, hit the bell symbol, hit all. Help me get past 100,000 subscribers. Follow me on Rumble in case that goes wrong. Get a membership to my Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal for free, simondixon.com. And maybe you can also subscribe to my podcast so that you can download this on the move, and you can do it with no extra time. You don't have to watch this. You can do it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. All those links are around you. Please share that and get more and more people involved. I'm going to repair my voice, and then we're going to go